Joining us now, Corey Lewandowski, former campaign manager for the Trump for President campaign. He's currently a senior advisor with the Vice President's Great America Committee PAC. You can go to greatamericacommittee.com. And he's the author of the now New York Times blockbuster bestseller, like we told you it would be, Trump's Enemies. Great read. Got to buy it. Go to B. Dalton or any of your bookstores, Amazon, it doesn't matter, and buy Trump's Enemies. Got to read this book because it tells you what's going on. Hey, Corey, great to have you, man.
Good morning, John. How are you today?
Never better. I am really fired up about the prospect of David Bossie being seriously considered as a candidate for chief of staff for the president. Corey, I got to tell you, I can't think of a better person for that job in America, except you.
Well, I know Dave Bossie very, very well. And let me tell you what I think the criteria is needed for the next chief of staff of the White House. Number one, you need a person who understands Donald Trump. And what I mean by that is not somebody who thinks that Donald Trump should be behind a desk, not talking to people. You have to, in other words, let Trump be Trump. Dave Bossie knows something about it, right? That's number one. Very important to understand the man. Number two, you have to have someone who's looking at the 2020 election cycle and know what's at stake and how every decision that the White House is making now may or may not impact the 2020 election. Number three, you need a person who understands the investigative unit of Congress now that the Democrats have taken over, and who better than the former chief investigator for Congress, Dave Bossie. And look, number four after that, you need a person who selfishly is willing to give up everything that they're doing to put their career on hold, their family on hold, and go and, put their time in to help this president be successful. I know Dave would do that. So those are the four criteria that I see are absolutely unequivocally necessary for the next chief of staff. And look, I think it's a short list, very candidly. I think Dave Bossie is on that list. Mark Meadows, the congressman from North Carolina, who I have enormous respect for, should be on that list. I think Chris Christie should be on that list. I think you need people who've known this man before he was the president, understand who he was and the way he manages. If they can find that person, which they have not had in the chief of staff role in the first 2 years, then you're going to see a president be even more successful than he's been.
All of those things that you mentioned, right, epitomizes David Bossie. I mean, he was the deputy campaign chairman. He knows the president. He gets him. This is the other thing, Corey. He's been through a campaign that was tough. He was there when the Access Hollywood tape came out, right? He's been through it all. And he's also mature. A couple of the other things. He's very mature, and he's a very good manager, and he's proven that. So, because you also have to have some management ability, and he's done that, and he's not going to waver. And the final thing is his loyalty is not in question. And I got to tell you, Corey, if you take your book, Trump's Enemies, one of the frustration of Trump's base and the many millions of people who work so diligently to provide him with this opportunity to be president, we feel like we've been kicked in the teeth when you looked at the number of people put in that White House that were not Trump supporters, didn't back him, don't believe in him, didn't do anything for him during the campaign. They actually undermined him. Half of them in there, they voted for Clinton. So it's very frustrating to have this, and what Bossie would signify for Trump Nation is we finally got somebody in there that actually believes in the guy like we do, right?
Well, look, there's no question Dave Bossie is a loyal Trump supporter, and he was before Donald Trump was ever a candidate, and he has continued to be. And I do think there is a frustration amongst people from the outside who helped get Donald Trump elected, that saw the swamp take over, that saw individuals coming in making decisions that excluded those people from getting jobs in the administration. Look, there were plenty of jobs to go around, but what we've seen is people who've been loyal to the president at some level have not been given those opportunities, and I think it's very disappointing. And I do think if you want to keep that group of people engaged, the people who were there early, and look, John, I'm okay with people who came to the campaign after it started and after their candidate dropped out. That's perfectly fine, and that's normal. but you shouldn't overlook the people who were there from the beginning. And Dave is a person who understands that group of people. He's one of the people who I relied on when I was running the campaign on a regular basis to ask advice and counsel for. And look, I don't know if he'd take the job. He's got a young family like I do, but I know if he were given that opportunity, it would only be a benefit to Donald Trump.
Okay, so where do we stand with it? You mentioned two of the candidates, Chris Christie and Mark Meadows, both very qualified people, would do a good job, but you're putting him in a category of three. How real is it that he is going to get serious consideration, Corey?
Well, look, let me say, John, my biggest concern is we make a mistake in the next chief of staff position. And if that happens, and we choose, when I say we, the administration chooses a person who doesn't fit two of the criteria, and those two criteria have to be, number one, understanding what's at stake at 2020, and number two, understanding the powers of the House subpoena cannon, which is being aimed at the White House and being readied for war. If you don't have a person who understands both of those things, and I think it's a very small window, candidly, for someone who could fit both of those criteria, we will once again do a disservice to this president. Look, John Kelly has no understanding of what politics is. He has very limited understanding of what the media is. And because of that, we saw some places where we should have won elections in the midterm elections that we didn't because they weren't focused on the midterms. They waited to put the president out until after Labor Day and said, hey, he's going to go and do 40 events more than any other president, and we're going to save the House. If they would have had someone in place who was looking at his agenda through the lens of keeping the Republican Congress in place, we would have been in a very different spot today. And instead, every person who now works in this administration is anticipating significant legal bills because the Democrats are going to use their power of subpoena to advance their agenda, and that's a very dangerous thing.
You know, Corey, you're so right, because the subpoena, you called it the subpoena cannon, the subpoena bazooka is coming. But the second thing you're right on, because of the lack of political savvy in the White House by both the chief of staff and his political team at the time, not getting him out earlier, if he went to 15, let's add on 15 rallies, just 15. I mean, he did 40. He could have done 55. You went on 15 rallies in 15 congressional districts, and he could have saved those seats, and maybe the House right now would be a very different story than it is. And so, you know, they kind of, I mean, I got the whole go to the U.S. Senate seats, and I got that, but there were probably 15s. Look, if he went to Orange County for a day, okay, Orange County, he could have saved 3 of those seats in one day because they all got beat by under 2,000.
And, John, look, there were some significant pieces of legislation that if the White House would have engaged in could have saved some seats, particularly in the industrial Midwest where some of those industries are getting killed. I'm thinking of the coal industry. I'm thinking of the steel industry, right, where with a political lens on what you're doing, right, as opposed to us continuing to subsidize wind and solar, maybe we need to make sure that our base of coal and steel is coming back, and they've started, but they could always do more. And in Pennsylvania, losing 5 or 6 congressional seats is a significant difference, particularly in a state that is so important. And because you had a chief of staff in the building who either didn't understand it or didn't care, we're now in a position of looking at that cannon, pointing at the White House, and knowing that Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler and Chuck Schumer and these guys have so much animosity. All they want to do is stop this president's agenda. They will do and say anything to have that happen. We could have won more seats, and it's shameful that we didn't.
Right. And look, when the happy talk of the RNC is over and the Ron Romney with the 8 bajillion phone calls they made, when all that's over, you have to take account of what happened as an adult. And there was not a blue wave, right? The blue wave didn't come until after the mail-in ballots came in Arizona, California, etc. There's a lot of these seats we should have won. And it takes candor and maturity to evaluate the field after the battle and say, where did we fail? And look, that was one of the reasons. That's why I'm so in favor of Bossie. Had Bossie been there, this would not have happened. And I think you have spot on, Corey. By the way, we're with Corey Lewandowski, former campaign manager for the Donald Trump for President campaign, and now the author of another New York Times bestseller, Trump's Enemies. Buy it today. Go to Amazon, go to my website. You can buy it there. Just buy it because it's a great read. You're not going to be able to put it down. And you got to really understand what has gone on there. But, Corey, the sooner the better, because the subpoenas are coming and the Democrats' agenda is to take this president down. Now, let's go over some of the nonsense that's come out in the past several days, starting with Michael Cohen and the Southern District of New York calling the president individual one as a co-conspirator. So the president paid these women that were threatening to sue him, which companies do all the time. He paid them out of his corporate business account, which he had done many times, which every big company does. I mean, how is this illegal?
Hey, John, maybe your listeners have heard of a guy by the name of Les Moonves or Harvey Weinstein. I'm not equating the two, but look, here's what we know. First and foremost, Michael Cohen said when he first gave testimony that he did not do this at the direction of Donald Trump, that he did this on his own with no knowledge of Donald Trump. Then he changed his mind because he realized he was going to go to jail for tax evasion and taxi cab medallion problems and bank fraud and all these other things that he did that he perpetuated as crimes that nobody forced him to do. Then he came back and said, no, I was directed to make these payments at the request of Donald Trump. But what he doesn't say is, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense at all, was this typical? Was this traditional? Was this standard course of business? In other words, prior to Donald Trump ever getting into a race for president or running for office, did he ever or did his corporation ever make similar payments? And I don't know the answer to that, but if they did, then the pattern says that this was a standard business practice, had nothing to do with him running for office, and whatever Michael Cohen is saying is simply being said to cut down his prison time because Michael's a 50-year-old man who's going to spend at least 5 years in jail, which is 10% of his life, behind bars for crimes that he committed. And look, John, here's the crazy part. We know that Michael Cohen sold influence. He made $4 million off of corporations in a year trying to tell people to hire him to influence Donald Trump, and the whole thing was a scam. That's what Michael has always been, a giant scam.
Well, he's a scam because he had no influence over policy or anything. He never even had a conversation with the president, nor did he know anybody that was in there. He wasn't in those circles. He was not part of the campaign. He was not political. But look, I mean, if people wanted to pay him money, that's not illegal either. But you're right. I mean, the Trump organization has paid to get rid of lawsuits forever. Let me tell you something else that I was thinking about the other day. Two examples here. One is the Trump organization settled a lawsuit with the Trump University. They settled it, right? Because they just didn't want to deal with it. Companies settle lawsuits all the time. They settled it. Why isn't that a campaign violation, right? You can say the same thing.
You're exactly right. It's a great point. And look, the Trump organization is a private organization. I don't know how many piece of litigation. Although there was a lengthy story on how many pieces of litigation Donald Trump has been in over the years. It was like 500, of which he won like 450, right? So he has a pretty good track record in that. But that's what big businesses do. When you're a multi-billion-dollar entity, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, that's how things happen. And unfortunately, litigation is just part of that process.
Well, I mean, and my other example is if Mike Bloomberg runs for president, and I believe he will, why not? Everybody else is. Every time he goes on Bloomberg News, every time the Bloomberg website prints his name, technically that would be a campaign expenditure because he owns it and they're promoting him. So you can take this thing to the most absurd levels. That's why I don't think it's going anywhere. Let's get to Mueller. Now, the Russian collusion, all of a sudden they've stopped talking about that. Now they're on this Stormy Daniels. What's the deal there?
Well, there is no Russia collusion, okay? And what you have seen now is that Bob Mueller has found absolutely no evidence of any collusion between the Trump campaign and anything to do with a foreign entity to impact the outcome of the election. And the crimes that Bob Mueller has found people either guilty of or charged them with have by and large been things that have nothing to do with the campaign. Michael Cohen and his taxi cab medallions, Paul Manafort for tax evasion and hiding money overseas has nothing to do with this supposed collusion. And Bob Mueller is referring these crimes to the Southern District of New York because he has no jurisdiction, because Bob Mueller's task was to go out and look for a direct tie between the Russians and the Trump campaign. And since it doesn't exist, I would respectfully ask Bob Mueller to end this investigation, make his report fully transparent to the American public. And if Bob Mueller does that, he should demonstrate exactly what really happened, which is Hillary Clinton's law firm, Perkins Coie, took $5 million, paid Christopher Steele, the former British spy, to go to create the false dossier that was given to Bruce Orr at the Justice Department through his wife Nellie, and hand it to Jim Comey, and then put in play to go after this president. That's what the Mueller investigation should show. And there has not been one person from the Clinton campaign that has been prosecuted on this, not Podesta, who's failed to register as a foreign agent, not Andy McCabe, who's been referred to for criminal prosecution, the deputy director of the FBI, not Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who we write about at length in our book, and their emails, how they had an insurance policy to stop Donald Trump. Look, these are Trump's enemies, and they're not just enemies of the president, they're enemies of our country because they use their badges to spy on Americans because they didn't like their politics, and that should be the scariest thing to everybody.
Why won't the president simply release the FISA warrant? Just release it.
I want the president to release the FISA warrant. I want the president to release the 302s, which are the interviews that Bruce Orr did with the FBI to talk about how he came into possession of the dossier. We want that. We know, John, the declassification is so important. We know that the FBI leaked stories to sole source reporters. The reporters wrote stories, and then they used those stories in their FISA application. And what we heard from Jim Comey was, I don't know if the dossier was verified before, during, or after. How could people sign a warrant to spy on an American with information they don't even know to be verified? That is so dishonest. Can you imagine for 1 second if that happened to Barack Obama or the Clinton campaign? Can you imagine if this was done to Hillary Clinton, what the media would be saying or doing right now? They would literally be calling for people to be in jail, and those people should be in jail.
Well, that's why it's the fake news, right? Because it's completely duplicitous and you don't get accurate information. But, Corey, that's why you come on my show, the John Fredericks Radio Network, your Godzilla of the Truth in America. And we thank you for coming on. As always, Corey Lewandowski. By the way, his book, Trump's Enemies, gotta buy it, Trump's Enemies. Great book. Don't be shy. Buy the book now, Trump's Enemies. You can buy it on Amazon, B. Dalton, any of your favorite bookstore, and get it before Christmas. Trump's Enemies, New York Times bestseller again. Hey, Corey, we're out of time, man. Thanks for being with us.